This story is about an infamous serial killer in the 1970s who went off the radar for many years and is one of America's most infamous serial killers. Let's get into it. In the early 1970s, Ted Bundy was living in Washington state. He was an intelligent, well-spoken, politically active young man, and he was studying at the University of Washington. To the people who knew him casually, Bundy didn't just fit the image of a murderer. He could be charming, he could be confident, and he knew how to make people feel comfortable around him. And that all mattered, because Bundy didn't always have to force his victims into a car. Sometimes he simply just had to ask them for help. And he would pull up to these college campuses and simply ask girls on dates, ask if they wanted to be a part of a university study he was doing. Anything that was normal that he could say to them to get them in a vehicle, because he looked like a normal young man. Nobody expected the things that he wanted to do. So in 1974, young women were disappearing left and right from the Pacific Northwest. One of them was Linda Ann Healy, a 21-year-old student. She disappeared from her home in Seattle, February 1974. And then another woman disappeared, and then another, and another, and another. In these cases, they kept piling up and piling up until the police in the area realized they had to do something. Women were vanishing from college campuses, parks, public places. Police struggled to understand what was happening. There was no obvious connection between many of these victims until witnesses began describing something unusual. A man, young, white, with dark hair, and sometimes he was in a Volkswagen Beetle. And that was the reports that a lot of these places were receiving. One of Bundy's most disturbing methods of luring people into his car was completely just disturbing and simple at the same time. He would pretend to be injured. He would maybe approach a woman while wearing a sling and struggling with something, a heavy object, a piece of luggage, and maybe an injured arm or a leg. He wasn't necessarily just asking for money, he was asking for help. And someone who appeared injured didn't seem dangerous in the first place, so it was often overlooked. That's what made the deception so effective. A woman might see a man struggling and think, I should help him, especially a decent looking man that's younger. So she didn't know what she was potentially walking into a trap. Ted Bundy drove a Volkswagen Beetle, and investigators eventually discovered that his car was connected to several disappearances. But by the time police began seriously considering him a suspect, these women have already disappeared. Bundy's ability to appear normal gave him another big advantage. He could move through society without immediately attracting suspicion. He could go to school, go to work, he could talk to people, and then just disappear into the night. In August 1975, police in Utah stopped Bundy while he was driving. A police officer noticed something suspicious inside the vehicle. These were the items, including handcuffs and other objects that raised suspicion. Ted was arrested, but investigators still needed to prove that he was responsible for these disappearances. Eventually, evidence convicted him to the kidnapping of Carol Duranch. Duranch had suffered and survived an encounter with Bundy, and her testimony became extremely, extremely important. Bundy was convicted of kidnapping, but the story didn't end there. It was far from over. They're about to hold court. Ted Bundy was eventually charged with murder in Colorado, and then something happened that he would become one of the most famous moments in American true crime. Bundy decided to represent himself in all of his legal court proceedings. And those who know what that means, knowing representing yourself is a death sentence. Anybody that's ever been in the court system knows that there are certain legal binds, ways to say things even. You can't just go in there and just speak. You have to have everything. There's code, it's that's why you need to go to college for to be in be a lawyer. He appeared in court wearing a suit. He questioned the witnesses, he spoke confidently, and he seemed remarkably comfortable in front of cameras. For a man accused of horrific crimes, he didn't behave the way many people expected a murderer to behave. And that's why the public found him so fascinating. And can you believe, while incarcerated, Ted Bundy escaped not once, not twice, but during his escape, he jumped from a courthouse window. He was eventually captured, but months later, he escaped again. And this time, he disappeared. He eventually made his way to Florida. That's where the story would become even darker. In January 1978, Ted Bundy broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. Inside, he attacked several young women. Two were killed, others were seriously injured. And less than an hour later, another young woman, Cheryl Thomas, was attacked in a nearby residence. The crime shocked the community. Police were now searching for a dangerous murderer, but Ted Bundy was still free. But his freedom would not last much longer. On February 15th, 1978, Ted Bundy's time as a fugitive came to an end. A police officer stopped him in Pensacola, Florida. Bundy initially resisted identifying himself and who he was, but authorities eventually confirmed who he was: the man who escaped custody and the man suspected of numerous murders, and he was finally behind bars. For years and years, Ted Bundy denied many of the accusations against him, but as his execution approached, he began talking and talking. He confessed to killing numerous women. He had admitted to 30 murders across several states, but investigators believed there could have been more. How many? Nobody knows for certain, but Bundy took some secrets with him to the grave. January 24th, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair. Outside the prison, a crowd gathered. Some people celebrated, others held signs. Reporters waited for the story to end. Shortly after 7 in the morning, Ted Bundy was dead. He was just 42 years old. So Ted Bundy's story is often remembered because of his appearance, his intelligence, his charm, his courtroom behavior. But those things aren't what truly made his story frightening. The frightening part is how ordinary he could appear and how disordinary he could disappear. There was no obvious warning sign stamped across his forehead, no monster's face, no supernatural explanation, just a man who learned how to gain people's trust and use it against them. And that's perhaps the most disturbing lesson from the Ted Bundy case. Danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it asks for help. Sometimes it looks completely ordinary. But then there's sometimes that the person standing next to you is the person you should have been afraid of all along. Ted Bundy was executed in 1989, but the question still remains: how many victims that were never found? Ted Bundy confessed to 30 murders. Investigators have suspected additional victims. Thanks for watching. If you like the dark and mysterious, please subscribe and stay tuned, because sometimes we will post 3 to 4 times a week on this channel, new stories every day and every week. Stay tuned.